We had a goal to train 1,000 student missionaries by the end of 2024. We hit that in 6 months.
Look, okay, so this person's online content impacted you and led you to trust Christ, and then you were willing to share your testimony on video, and now this first grader who you've never met made a decision to trust Christ because of your impact.
That youth pastors in general have realized that traditional youth ministry isn't working. How does a church balance the needs of the lost with the needs of their own people?
What is it, one thing you've been most surprised by over the past year regarding students?
Saying that he's seen more people in the past couple of years come to Christ than he had in the past 20 years.
And I think it's 96% have syncretistic views, meaning when you actually boil it down, it's these actually don't work.
Well, and that's why it's we've had a reach of 528,430 people.
It's over 500,000.
Which is crazy.
How do we train students to have a biblical worldview in a culture that rejects biblical truth? Welcome to the Beyond the Youth Room podcast. My name is Ryne, and this is Keith. And today we are celebrating 1 year of the Beyond the Youth Room podcast. And so we have spent the last year investing in student ministries and student ministry leaders. And today we're going to be sharing with you all the biggest things we've learned in the past year. So stay tuned. Now, Keith, we launched the Beyond the Youth Room podcast 1 year ago.
Yep. 52 episodes.
Yep.
This is episode 52.
Yep. And so
every single week.
Yes, we haven't missed one. We have been investing for youth leaders earlier than that, but that's really when we ramped up, okay, hey, we're really going to do this. And so I think we've both been surprised by some things. Yes. We've also probably confirmed some things that we maybe already thought, but we want to take some time going through the biggest things that we've learned. But somebody might be watching this and be like, okay, well, you've put out podcasts for a year, but have you really, what do you mean? Is anybody, am I the only one watching these? So
when we first started, this has always been sponsored by a campus ministry called Edge Clubs that we're both part of. And we wanted to invest in more youth leaders because we saw in our local area here that there was, just not a focus on outreach, just not a passion for lost students in public schools and, lost students in any schools, homeschool, Christian school, public schools. That personal evangelism wasn't a metrics of a real priority in most youth ministries that we were talking with. So we're like, well, let's develop resources. We can't just address the problem or say that, call out the problem without providing a solution. And so we wanted to start creating resources and just teaching youth leaders what we've learned in our own youth ministry. So it's not like we're from the top down of our high horse speaking down to everybody because we've arrived, but really just sharing what's working in our own youth ministries so that other people may benefit from it. We also had the strategic intention to train more student missionaries as a result of investing in more youth leaders that could potentially use our student missionary training from Edge Clubs to equip more students to share the gospel. So we had them as a metrics of success. So it wasn't just eyeballs on our content was the goal. We wanted to resource people in a very strategic way. And so we went just some of the most recent stats. And by the way, I don't know if you realize this or not, but just since right before we started recording, we had another 45 sign up for student missionary training.
Awesome.
45 students. So with that, we had, to date of 2024, we had a goal to train 1,000 student missionaries by the end of 2024. We hit that in 6 months. So we half the time. In June, we hit 1,000, and that's continued to go up throughout the summer. And as we go into the fall, we have a new bold vision for our ministry to train 10,000 student leaders to be missionaries to their public middle or high schools. And so with that, we're seeing that it's directly related to putting out content like this. So today it's still continuing to rise, but we've had partnerships. We went from about 40 youth pastors that we were investing in our local network, and now that's increased to 187. And we're still increasing that as we build out more resource. We're building out a resource community for these youth pastors to kind of share different ideas and stuff with each other as well, as we're all trying to do this. But looking at the stats, it's crazy to think about. When it's, it's these are seems like Billy Graham numbers as far as people that actually have seen our stuff. But across our platforms, we've had a reach of 528,430 people.
It's over 500,000,
which is crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, I probably shouldn't say this, but I don't know if I would look at myself for that long. Like if I was watching a video, like, but we've had, hundreds of hours of content consumed. Like, maybe thousands. I don't even know. We didn't look up that metrics, but a lot of people have seen our stuff. And we're not trying to be famous or anything like that, but what we've realized through this is one, we're seeing an impact through this online content and this building this online community of youth pastors that are serious about reaching students for the lost. And so we just compiled a list of just the top 3. I mean, there's probably so many things that we've learned along the way. We even got a testimonial from a youth pastor.
Shout out to Ryan in
Ohio.
Yep.
And he said it in such a polite way, but he was like, I just remember watching the first few raw videos.
He didn't say it like that.
Or something it was like some kind of phrase. And I was like, okay, that's
like, we've learned a lot about ourselves.
We've learned a lot about how to even record content and just to hopefully improve our quality of content as we've done that. But if you guys didn't know, we are taking one episode of Beyond the Youth Room that we do weekly. It's usually about a half an hour or so. And we're chopping that up into smaller chunks and distributing that across Instagram and Facebook and TikTok and podcasting platforms for the whole episode, YouTube long form content, YouTube shorts. So I don't remember, like, what is it like? How many, if you count like each platform times, we're posting daily on all of those platforms, except for the podcasting and YouTube longs.
We're posting about 28 times a day.
28 times a day?
No.
Yeah. So, so Instagram.
A week, 20 times a week.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So, but 7, it's for 7 days. Yep. And then times, however many
28
platforms.
times 52, whatever that math is.
There's a lot of content out there. Yeah. And surprisingly, TikTok, that's the highest growth that we've received is on TikTok. So we have youth pastors that are, I guess, checking in on their students and watching our content. So anyways, all that to say is we've learned a lot about creating content that helps people, but we've talked to a lot of youth pastors.
Yes. There's been a lot of conversations.
It's been great to see the needs, and we're still always learning about how we can best serve you guys. But number one that we put on this list was we have found, as we've talked to many youth leaders, that they are missing out on a potential revival in their youth ministry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we've seen what's happening in our youth ministries. Like we've seen like what's happening in our area. Like there's a hunger for God's word. There's a hunger for the gospel. Students are way more open. I would say like more students we've seen come to Christ in the past. And this is what Seth, what's his face said?
Shane Pruitt.
Oh, Shane Pruitt. Yeah, not Seth. Shane Pruitt said, sorry, Shane, if you're watching this. I don't think you watched it.
Probably not, but that's okay.
Yeah, so Shane had said this too, like where he was just saying that he's seen more people in the past couple of years come to Christ than he had in the past like 20 years combined. Mm-hmm. And so I think there is a revival that's kind of sweeping our nation, maybe even our world when it comes to students leading the way. And we're seeing that in our own youth ministries, but we're also, I think youth leaders, if they're not getting on board with really focusing on gospel advancing ministry, challenging their students in these ways, they might be missing out on seeing those results in their own youth ministries. So a couple of the side, sublines or sub points from that is that students want to join a bold cause. Mm-hmm. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. They want something bigger than themselves.
Yes. And this answers a lot of the questions that we've addressed in previous episodes too, of like, why aren't they consistent or competing against sports and other activities? Like, why aren't students being committed? I think they're being challenged outside of our youth ministries, and they're just going with the bigger challenge. Like they want to be part of something bigger themselves. And we as youth leaders, we want to channel that desire to be part of a big vision or a bold cause, to channel that towards the cause of Christ, which is Luke 19:10, to seek and save those who are lost. And so the second one is, second sub point of that is I found, I kind of knew this, but I've seen this a lot more in the past couple of years. Students are way more capable of significant action and deep truths than we realize.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. There's, I was just sharing. So we have an adult leader in our youth ministry now who was a student years ago. And I remember I took her and some other student leaders to a Lead the Cause event in Denver one year. And we were kind of developing our bold vision for that year. It was me and I had a female staff, that was kind of leading the girls, and we had both were kind of talking. We did this workshop about like how to set a bold vision for our youth ministry, and we were like, how many like students could we realistically see coming to Christ as a result of sharing the gospel boldly with tracking gospel conversations, and I was thinking like, man, if we saw 50 students come to Christ in one year, that would be like I mean, we'd have to. I mean, if one student come to Christ, of course, that's the Lord's doing. But like that would just be like something that's never happened in our youth ministry before. And so I was like, asking her, the female adult leader that I took, I was like, well, what do you think? She's like, well, I think we need to be realistic too. Like, like maybe we should just, pray for 25 so that students aren't like discouraged if we don't hit anywhere close to 50 or whatever. So I was like, okay, well, let's ask the students. And this girl, Lydia, was, she was a student leader then. She's an adult leader now. She was like, when we asked, hey, what do you guys think we could be praying towards for a bold vision for our youth ministry? And she was like, I think we should be praying for 200 students to come to Christ this year. And everybody else, like, that's exactly what I was thinking. Like, that was my number too. And then they like looked at us, they're like, what number were you guys thinking? We're like, oh, that's not important.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah. Don't worry about it. But I mean, that really kind of set the tone for like seeing the students are ready for a challenge. Like they're ready to go all in. Like they're more like bold in their approach than most adults that I've ever met. So with that, I think they're more capable of significant action and deep truths than we realize. And so that kind of goes into that point of many youth leaders are missing out on revival without challenging their students towards personal evangelism. Yeah. So the second one, do you want to cover this one? Because we were talking about this one as well as being something that we've learned in the past year from doing 52 weeks of content, but posting daily, interacting with a lot of youth leaders online.
Yeah. Number 2 is youth pastors in general have realized that traditional youth ministry isn't working. And we were kind of talking about this before we started recording. I don't know if they've really figured out what works yet across the board.
I think realizing there's a problem is the first step.
Yes. But
it's like, hi, my name is Keith and I am an alcoholic. Like, realizing like the problem first and then, seeing the solution is a different step. But I think there's more people that are aware, okay, what we've done in the past isn't always working now.
Yeah. I think they haven't quite connected with what do we do differently. But for instance, I think most youth pastors we've had conversations with realize like, we can't compete with the world in terms of attraction and entertainment. We can't, students are leaving the faith. We can't just keep doing what we're always doing. Or, hey, like if it's about how many, just like kids attending, not necessarily like spiritual, growing God's kingdom. It's like, hey, if it's just about that, like what's the point? And so I think we've talked to a lot who are kind of at the point where it's like, I don't quite know what the next steps are, but I know we can't go back to that. And so I think when people kind of talk about the youth ministry stereotype of youth pastors trying to be relevant and, doing certain things, it's like that's kind of a stereotype more of like the past than I would say it is now. And, hey, like the attractional model, I think that's more the past than it is now. And I think now it's more, and I don't know if people have seen it because of just the brokenness. And I think the past couple of years have just revealed a lot in the next in this generation. I don't know what exactly caused people to see that, but I think we've talked to people who've just been like, yeah, this isn't working. And not like what they're doing isn't working, but just like what we've done in the past isn't working. Yeah. There's got to be something better.
Well, so there's a couple of things there. So you have people that were doing youth ministry like me, like I've been around for a long time. And I've realized like, okay, this isn't the same. Yeah. And so, you have that perspective. And I think like, older youth pastors, what should we name them? Like geriatric youth pastors, like, elderly youth pastors like myself. We've realized like things have been changing, and we're not trying to do the same thing over again. But I think there's a new wave of newer youth pastors that they don't know what to do. So then they're learning from their senior pastor that used to be a youth pastor back in the days when it was working a certain way. Yeah. And so they're just saying, hey, well, when I was youth pastor, this is what we did and this is what worked. And if you're not doing that, then you're missing out, And so I've even seen like that there's younger youth pastors now that have been trained by people that used to be in youth ministry back in the heyday of like attractional model. And they're seeing the flaws in that, but they're kind of now caught in between. It's like, I learned how to do this from my boss. Yeah. And so they're, in that tension of like, okay, I don't, I want to be respectful. And that's what we're talking about with, some of the youth pastors that, they feel confined like that because there's an expectation from their senior leadership that they have to be in the office a certain amount of hours or do certain things, or it's like, hey, you just need to be catering to a menu mentality towards the students.
Or you need to care for the kids in our church. And it's like, of course we want you to be in the community, but really like we need to keep the people here kind of happy in a bad sense of the way.
Yep. And so, so they kind of feel bound by that, or, chained to a certain type of box of broken youth ministry that they're seeing isn't really working. But the people that used to do youth ministry years ago are speaking into that, and they're like, well, it's not working because you're not working. And so there's definitely, so that goes back to the point, just to reiterate that youth pastors in general have realized that traditional youth ministry isn't working. And so we pray that our content and our resources are providing some solutions towards that and just sharing what's working for us. Number 3, and this is a thing that we've seen, like there's been some auxiliary things that have come out of the Beyond the Youth Room podcast that we've done, personally and with our churches outside of our podcast. And we're seeing that what we've learned in the past year is that online content is an extremely powerful tool for scalable impact.
Mm-hmm.
Notice I didn't say replacing in-person impact.
Correct.
So we still want to, care for people, we want to shepherd people, but online content has been a very powerful tool for us to scale our impact. And this is why we went from literally 10xing our impact from student missionary training in 2023. So we went from, I think it was 105 students. We trained, over 1,000 in the first 6 months of 2024. And then now we're gearing up to train over 10,000 students using our online scalable content. And so with that, we're seeing that it's an incredibly powerful tool to scale impact. And so 2 things that have come out from this, like outside of Beyond the Youth Room. So one, I was talking with our church leadership. We had a brainstorming session late 2023 about how to be more effective at equipping our congregation for, living out their faith. So the church that I'm on staff with, McLean Bible, we have, at the Prince William location, Todd Peters is our location pastor, and he's a former Navy SEAL, or a retired Navy SEAL.
Mm-hmm. Be careful.
I was going to say that. Yeah. A retired Navy SEAL, not a former Navy SEAL. And so we had this theme going into 2024 where we want to equip our congregation to be battle ready, for spiritual battle, to have a battle buddy, so enforce accountability, in relationships and living out their faith. And so we developed a podcast called The Warrior's Walk. So it's part sharing some of his Navy SEAL journey and just the connections between having a very strategic mindset military wise to being on the spiritual battlefield now as he's retired and become a pastor. And so we've had the same approach. We're creating weekly content, podcasting, putting out videos and stuff. And then you guys also at your church have created a podcast
for student ministry,
for student ministry.
Yeah.
And tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So we were doing it with, this podcast, and I was like, okay, I kind of know how to do a podcast now. And of course everybody has a podcast, but it's like, hey, we want to have students on. So really it's not about how many people watch the podcast. It's another way for them to share the gospel with their friends. And so, a lot of times it takes overcoming a lot of nerves to go up and share the gospel, in person with somebody. But for some of these kids, if they're on a podcast, they'll send that to their friends, no problem, and be like, hey, would you check this out? And so part of the podcast is the kids sharing their story of how they came to trust Christ. There's a clear, this is the gospel in every single podcast. And then we just talk about a topic. And so it does multiple things. Number one, it allows kids to kind of raise the flag and be like, hey, this is what I believe. And they can send it to friends and be like, hey, would you mind watching this and let me know what you think?
Yeah.
Number two, it also is a way for us to disciple kids. Of course, there's a lot of great resources out there, and there's a lot of better resources than what, we can provide as youth pastors, but they connect with us. And for some reason, they're like, hey, if I hear it from you, it means more than if I hear it from somebody I've never met.
Yeah.
And so it's a way for us to disciple students. And then honestly, it was a way to encourage people of what was going on. And so through doing that, we've seen more, we've seen our youth ministry pages grow. We've seen our YouTube account grow and all stuff. And that's okay. It's good, but it's not the end goal. But one of the stories in particular, there was a young girl, she came to Christ. I think I've shared this before, but I haven't shared the update to what actually ended up happening afterwards. Is she came to youth group and we were sharing the gospel with her, and I was like, hey, have you ever heard that before? She was like, yeah, I listened to it on my friend's podcast episode that she did. And so her friend was on the podcast and her, and that was her introduction to the gospel. Well, this young girl ended up coming to church, to youth group for a little bit, continue to come. She trusted Christ, a couple of months ago. Well, then she decided, hey, I'm going to get baptized. And one of the things we do is we give kids an opportunity to share their stories on video that we play in service before they get baptized. And so it's like 3 minutes, like real quick. But before Christ, when I trusted Christ, how my life has been different since. Yeah. So she said, hey, I want to do this. So she shared, her story about her friend kind of leading her to Christ. And that night, one of our elders got a text from another family, don't know, I've never met them, nothing, but they attend our church. And they're like, hey, I just want you to know, our first grade daughter, when we were putting her to bed tonight, she said, hey, I want to trust Christ. Like, I want to make a decision to trust Christ. And they're like, okay, that's awesome. But like, well, where's that come from? And she goes, well, I saw that girl's story before she got baptized and I want to do what she did. And they asked her like, okay, well, what did she do? And she like nailed it, like first grade, like the gospel clearly. And so then we were able to go back to this girl and be like, look, okay, so this person's online content impacted you and led you to trust Christ. And then you were willing to share your testimony on video. And now this first grader who you've never met made a decision to trust Christ because of your impact. And so it was just like, why aren't we doing more of this? And so it's been really cool to see just the numbers grow, but there's countless stories of like letters I've gotten from family members who are like, I've been praying for this person to become a Christian. It's so cool to see that they trusted Christ. And it does have a real world impact.
Absolutely. And I would say like, if you're watching this, like, I mean, you would agree, that online content is powerful. I mean, everybody is like talking about it, like businesses are using it, churches are using it, like all this different stuff. But if you're in that boat and you're like, man, I don't create any content, or I'm afraid to do this because it could be controversial, I would say get started. Like, I mean, like we're like, oh, well, what if this and what if this? And it was like, just do it, push record. Most people, I mean, many people we do get a lot of weird comments and stuff. I'll say that, but for the most part, like people are there's way more people that have been impacted positively by our content than the naysayers or the crazy people that leave weird comments or whatever. Yeah. But with that too, what is some advice that you give to someone that's starting off? Maybe they want to start a youth ministry, YouTube channel or podcast, with their students or with their church to equip their students more. What was some advice you'd be to give?
Start where you can. There was one youth pastor who came up and actually visited both of our ministries, and they started, they just film a student, and it's like 3 minutes. It's like their student sharing their story in 3 minutes. They post it, and they're getting traction with it, with people seeing it. So I would just say start where you can. If you're like, look, I don't have time, I don't have the know-how, I don't have any of this, just start small. But the more we show what's going on, that's really what we're about. It's not, social media is not a bulletin board for what we're doing. Yeah. It's showing the actual transformation that's happening. Yep. And I would say start where you can, even if it's just, cell phone footage of a student sharing their story. I mean, obviously parental permission, that goes without being said, but like, just start sharing and start small, and you'll see it go from there. But think of it this way. It just gives the kids the ability in a no pressure way to share the gospel with their friends. So we even created a video of like, this is the gospel. And then we gave it to our kids and we're like, just share it with your friend and be like, hey, would you watch this video and let me know what you think? It's like, is that them sharing the gospel? Yeah, because relationally they have a relationship with a student. Now they're using a third-party resource to do that, but it's also, I'm the one in the videos thinking like, hey, my youth pastor put this video together. Would you just mind watching it? And so there's like, when you start looking for easy wins, like digital content it plays a huge role in that.
Well, and you guys, I mean, you can even track some of the metrics of like how much people view, like retention. So in other words, you can see if they've actually watched the gospel. Yep. On a video that you've posted or whatever, like, it's like, oh, they just clicked on, click off. You don't know. Yeah. It's like, no, you can actually see how long they watched it, or the average watch time of the video. And so, so with that, you can, kind of gauge like, some more impact that you're having. I wouldn't solely base that off, don't disconnect completely from relational, in person, like incarnational ministry, but it's a way that people can be impacted more. Like, why wouldn't you use it?
Well, for instance, we shared the gospel in person last school year 563 times. Through the podcast, I stopped tracking because it kind of just got overwhelming. But at the time I stopped tracking, it was like we were on pace for well over 10,000 like people who had actually heard the gospel and could verify that they had watched those clips through the podcast. So it's like 10,563. Now the 563 were much more impactful, don't get me wrong, but in terms of the reach of, you might share the gospel with somebody who first heard it from the podcast, like that one girl story.
Yeah. Crazy.
Yep.
Yeah, we had so if you guys and what is it? So if someone wants to check out your youth ministries as an
Yes,
example
it is
of what to do, the perfect example of like how they should model everything.
Yeah, it is it's the New Normal podcast. And the easiest way to find that is it's on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, but our YouTube channel is The Gathering at Grace Life, and they'll see the New Normal podcast there.
If only there was like a sign behind us that said the name of your youth ministry or something.
That would be helpful.
That would be helpful. Yeah. Okay. And then if you guys want to check out the one that we do with Navy SEAL, it's called The Warriors Walk. And so that's on podcasting platforms and YouTube. But one of the cool things that we had, I think I told you about this, was so Pastor Todd had shared, I had asked a question about like when he was deployed, what were some of the like most impactful things like people would send as gifts?
Yeah.
And he said that there was a girl that he went to high school with, that he grew up with, that became like a third grade teacher. Did I tell you the story?
I heard it on the podcast. Yeah.
And so he was deployed, and she wrote like Valentine's cards, from all of her kids, like this third grade class, whatever, and then mailed him a care package like while he was deployed. And he got that, and it just like lit up his day or whatever. Well, we shared that story. Yeah. As like one of the cool things that he experienced when he was deployed. And then someone in that third grade class, 20 some years ago or whatever, saw the video and was like, I was in that class. Like I wrote one of those Valentines to you and like commented on her. I was like, what are the chances?
Yeah,
Literally there's
crazy.
I don't remember. It was something astronomical. It was like 79 years of content is uploaded every hour on YouTube or something. So I'm saying like out of all that content, like this one guy saw it. So you never know what the algorithm will serve up to people, to get your message out. And so it's just kind of a cool connection that we made even just by putting that content out.
Yeah.
And then let's transition into some rapid fire questions. So just to recap the top 3 things that we've learned after doing 52 weeks. I almost said 52 years of content. 1 year, 52 weeks of content weekly is the top 3. Many youth leaders are missing out on a revival that they could be experiencing. Youth pastors in general have realized that traditional youth ministry isn't working. And then online content is a powerful tool for scalable impact that we can leverage.
Yeah.
So rapid fire. What's one thing that you've been most surprised by over the past year regarding youth pastors?
I would say the struggle with the church as a whole, where the youth ministry feels so disconnected. I think that's been a little bit surprising to me, where we talk to so many youth guys and they're like, I would love to do that, I just can't. And it's like, well, hold on, like, what do you mean you can't? And they're like, this is kind of the way, like, it's always been done. And I don't know if that's just because in the ministry context I'm in, it is like the complete opposite side of that. It's like, go do it. Like, we trust you, go do it. But I've been surprised by how many are like that. The
restricted.
Yeah. The second one I would say is, and this doesn't surprise me that it is the case, but it surprises me how many youth pastors we've been able to have conversations about this, is the growing homeschool movement in their youth ministry and how to leverage that for the gospel. I would say that was
actually one of our highest watched videos recently, right?
Yeah. So we've talked to so many youth pastors who are like, I have so many, homeschool or Christian school kids. That population is growing. And while we are, we want to serve every single kid that comes through, there's a desire to reach the kids in the local public schools, because we know that still about 90% of, our students are in public schools as a culture. And so I think I've had a lot of conversations about that. And while it's like, I've recognized it's been surprising how prevalent it's been.
I think, so I feel like I spent many years feeling like I was one of like 10 people doing what I was doing with youth ministry. I know that's not true, but I just felt like there was not that many people that were getting and implementing gospel advancing ministry.
Yeah.
And what I've been surprised by over the past year, and we were talking about this a little bit, we went to the Dare to Share Summit, which was just like a collection of everybody that's doing gospel advancing ministry. Not everybody, but like a lot of the top leaders in the country, and talked to people around the world now. Like, I mean, even when I was in France back in the spring, we connected with someone else that was doing gospel advancing ministry there, and through Word of Life. And so I'm surprised, as we've been emphasizing this more, how many of us are out there.
There you go.
I mean, even though there's so many more that need to I think adapt this mentality of gospel advancing ministry. But that's one thing I've been surprised by, is like the community and the camaraderie of people that have that are doing this in the trenches.
Yeah. All right. Same question, but for students, what is the one thing you've been most surprised by over the past year regarding students?
Yeah. So, I was, I recently came back into a position at my church. I guess it's been, has it been 2 years?
I think so.
Oh my gosh. Wow. So 2 years ago, and I think, so just in the past year, I've been surprised, that students are still so bold.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, just in ways that, cause like, I think the culture has like made students to be like, fragile and like, like wimpy and, just kind of like, you can't really depend on them. You can, I think that those are stereotypes.
Yeah.
And I'm not seeing that at all. Like I'm seeing, just students. I mean, like our students are like fearless, like bold, like just determined. I mean, they're really, really getting it. And so that's one thing I've been surprised by, like pleasantly surprised. Not like I didn't want that to happen. Like I'm like, yes, this is awesome. Like this is, even in the face of like them going through hard times themselves, like family wise or circumstances, they're still like, oh, we're gonna live out the gospel. So that's what I've been pleasantly surprised by. How about you?
I think how little, as a whole, students have thought about spiritual things. The statistics say that 48% of Gen Z are religious nuns, meaning they have no religious affiliation. But just anecdotally, with a little bit of data behind it, we shared a couple podcast episodes ago that in our youth ministry, we've seen 257 first-time visitors. And one of the things we really started changing in the fall, when we really started seeing students come to know Christ, is like every person who comes to youth group, the gospel shared with them through like their first-time, visitor kind of introduction and things like that. But then I try and make a point to go around to all of them and be like, hey, so like you heard like what we believe, like, what do you believe? And the way I kind of phrase it is like, do you know what you believe about God? Or are you still figuring it out? Yeah. I am shocked time and time again by how many kids say, I really don't know what I believe. And so I think the thing that has surprised me the most is we assume way too much of what kids believe, and training our students to not assume, hey, what do you believe? Well, I'm a Christian. It's like, okay, awesome. So like, what do you mean when you say that? And the amount of times kids have been like,
I don't know.
Yeah. Like literally at the answers I get, it's like, oh, I was baptized as a baby. And it's like, okay, that's really cool. Like,
what good person.
Like, what do you believe? And they're like, nobody's ever popped that bubble to be like, oh no, like we go to church, like stuff like that. So I've been surprised. Now that goes to why I think we're seeing such a revival, is because we're not dealing with kids who are like, this is what I believe. And like, they're coming from like, I don't know. Like, what do you guys believe? And it's like, well, here's what we believe. And they're like, that makes sense to me. Like, but that's what I've been most surprised by.
Yeah. That's good. Okay. So let's do some 1 minute questions.
Yes.
Do you have a timer you're pulling up, or do you want me to pull up one?
I got mine.
Okay. So timer. Oh yeah. No, you're going to ask me this one.
Right? All right. I got it. So Keith, we talked about this, either last episode or a couple episodes ago. We talked about the biggest frustrations. And one of the biggest one was youth pastors were frustrated with how much they had to undo what the culture had done. And so speaking on that, how do we, as youth pastors in 1 minute, how do we train students to have a biblical worldview in a culture that rejects biblical truth?
I don't know where I learned this from, but I always go back to I think it's called like the 5 why deduction. So, if you ask someone what they believe in, and then you ask them why, and then they'll tell you, well, that's what my parents believe, or that's how I was raised. And then you ask them, well, why did they believe? And then you just kind of deduct it down. And oftentimes you'll find out one source of truth that they got their information from. And then it's helpful to understand the reliability of Scripture as an argument to address biblical worldview, because you're basing your worldview on the Bible. And so if you have a contrary view of that, okay, what is your source of truth for what you believe? And oftentimes people don't know. Like they're like, well, someone told me that. Well, how can you trust them? Why can you trust them? And it's like, well, because they were taught something, or they figured it out, or whatever. And in reality, like we have to deduct it down to, okay, what is your source of truth? And if it's not the Bible, it can be contrary to factual evidence.
Yeah. I think it's by Barna, Raising Spiritual Champions, gets into that about syncretism. And I think he's like 90. So syncretism is the mixing of world views that don't actually mix. Yeah. And I think it's like 96%. Like the
coexist bumper stickers.
Correct.
That's only singling out Christianity.
Yes. But I think it's like 96% have like syncretistic views, meaning like when you actually boil it down, it's like no, these actually don't work.
Well,
together.
and that's why it's like, it's helpful to get past the labels, so like students are like, I have a friend that, that's Catholic. And I'm like, well, did you ask them what they believe? And like, well, no, they said they're Catholic. It's like, I've talked to people that are, they're like, oh yeah, I'm Catholic. And I'm like, what do you believe about like what happens after you die? So, well, I believe we're all reincarnated.
Yeah.
That's actually Buddhist.
Yep.
And so, just to kind of get down to like, okay, what are the beliefs? Asking good questions.
Yep.
Admire what you can about their faith and admit that you need Jesus just as much as they do. Ask, admire, admit.
Absolutely.
All right. So for your 1 minute question, how does a church balance the needs of the lost with the needs of their own people?
Yeah, you hear this a lot where it's like, well, they're a seeker church or we are, really like a biblical church. It's like those two things are not opposed to each other. It's like, hey, when we view things as a menu, it gets difficult because it's either this or that. When we view things as a roadmap of like, hey, we're going to help you go from here to here because that's what we see Jesus did with his disciples. Now all of a sudden it opens it up. And so now we can, by training our people that are, part of our church to go and reach the lost, that's how we balance the needs. When we try and see it as, hey, we as the church, staff and things, we need to be creating events to reach, our community and things like that. That's when it gets really difficult because we only have so much time. But when we train our people to take biblical truth to those that need to hear it, now all of a sudden we're modeling what it tells us to do in Ephesians, where it says that we are to train up the saints for the work, to equip the saints for the work of making disciples. So that would be roadmap versus menu.
There you go.
Yep.
Less than 1 minute.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that concludes another episode of...
That includes 1 year.
1 year of episodes.
Of episodes of Beyond the Youth Room podcast.
Yeah. Lessons learned from 1 year of investing in youth leaders through online content. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you haven't seen our online student missionary training, you can access that for free. If you go to edgeclub.org/training, you can sign up for it, and then you can show that to your students to equip them on how to advance the gospel among their peer groups. So stay tuned for the next episode, and we'd love to see you back. If you haven't shared this or if you haven't subscribed to the podcast or the YouTube channel, we encourage you to do that. It's the best compliment that you can give us is subscribing and then sharing it with other people. So we'll see you next time.